In September 2017, Jim Carrey stood on a red carpet and told a reporter he did not believe he existed. People thought he was breaking down. They thought the years of loss, the lawsuits, the death of Catriona White, and the depression he had carried since the 1980s had finally cracked him open. He vanished from Hollywood soon after. Then, in 2026, he came back with a woman beside him that nobody had ever seen before. She had been there for 4 years. Now, at 62, Jim Carrey's latest partner is finally revealing what really happened during those missing years. Jim Carrey was born James Eugene Carrey on January 17, 1962, in Newmarket, Ontario, Canada. Long before fame, before movie sets and red carpets and giant paychecks, his life was built around pressure. His family lived in Scarborough near Toronto, and money was never loose or easy. His father, Percy Carrey, had real musical talent and could play the saxophone. But very early on, Jim learned a hard truth: being gifted was not enough. Bills still had to be paid, and losing everything was always a real possibility. That fear got even more real when Jim was around 12 years old. His father lost his job at the Titan Wheels tire factory. At one point, they ended up living out of a Volkswagen van. It was not some adventurous road trip. It was survival. Normal life started slipping away. Sleep became harder. Privacy disappeared. School became difficult. Some accounts say Jim and his brother spent months living in a tent at Charles Daly Park near Lake Ontario in Lincoln. That was the kind of childhood he was dealing with. So, his teenage years did not feel normal at all. Jim was not focused on sports, dating, or fitting in. He was focused on getting through the next day, helping his family, and finding a way to keep going. He knew what cold felt like. He knew what instability felt like. And he knew how quickly life could turn against you. Later, people would look at his comedy and see all that wild energy and chaos. But underneath it, there was pain. Underneath it, there was a kid who had learned very young that nothing was secure. As the family kept struggling, things became even tougher. They got a house across the street from the Titan Wheels factory, but only because the family agreed to work there as janitors and security guards. That was the deal. Jim was still a teenager, yet he was working 8-hour overnight shifts, starting around 6 p.m. and going into morning, then trying to make it through school during the day. He was cleaning through the night, barely sleeping, then sitting in class expected to function. It was exhausting, humiliating, and forced him to grow up far too early. School never had a fair chance. Jim attended Agincourt Collegiate Institute in Scarborough, but the pressure was too heavy. His grades suffered, his mood suffered, his energy disappeared, and eventually on his 16th birthday in 1978, he dropped out. Wanting to be funny and actually succeeding on stage were two very different things. Jim got his first brutal lesson when he performed stand-up at Yuck Yucks in Toronto at just 15 years old. He wore a suit his mother had made and tried to look professional. But the audience did not laugh. He left the stage in silence. For most teenagers, that would have crushed the dream completely. But Jim treated it like a painful lesson instead of a final answer. He kept studying timing, expressions, movement, and control. Once he left school, the path got even narrower. There was no diploma, no backup plan. Comedy became the thing he chose fully because there was not much else left. Then, in 1981, at just 19 years old, he left Canada and moved to Los Angeles alone. That move was a gamble. He had almost no money, no powerful name, and no guarantee that anyone in America would care. He started again from the bottom, doing open mic nights, trying to survive. Money was so tight that some stories describe him sleeping in his car. He did not move to Los Angeles for comfort. He moved because staying in the same place felt even riskier. Slowly, the work began to matter. Rodney Dangerfield noticed Jim's act and hired him as an opening act. Suddenly, Jim was performing in front of large crowds attached to a major comedy name. He treated every performance like an audition. Still, Hollywood did not welcome him right away. In the 1980s, doors kept slamming. He auditioned for Saturday Night Live twice, and got rejected both times. One account says that before one of those performances had a real chance, people assumed Lorne Michaels would not like him anyway. For a comedian, being shut out by SNL twice was a sign that one of the biggest comedy gates in America had no place for him. Then came what looked like a breakthrough. In 1984, Jim landed the lead role in an NBC sitcom called The Duck Factory. On paper, this should have been the moment everything changed. But the show only aired from April 12th to July 11th, 1984, and then it was gone. Another chance had arrived and disappeared almost immediately. That kind of thing can break people, so he kept grinding. Through the 1980s, Jim bounced between stand-up and small acting jobs, surviving more than thriving. And somewhere in the middle of all that, in 1987, he did something strange. He wrote himself a check for $10 million for acting services rendered, and kept it in his wallet, dating it years in the future. It sounds almost unreal now, especially because in 1994 he would earn exactly $10 million for Dumb and Dumber. The point was not magic. The point was obsession. Then, after years of rejection, the thing that truly changed his career arrived. In 1990, Jim Carrey joined In Living Color. Suddenly, he had the perfect place for everything that made him different. Jim was the only white regular in the cast, and that detail mattered because the show was built to showcase black and minority talent. He could not rely on image. He had to earn his place through sheer force of performance. He attacked sketches with a physical madness that made him impossible to ignore. One of the clearest examples was Fire Marshal Bill, a character built from a rejected idea so extreme it never had a chance on television. The result was unforgettable, funny but also disturbing in a way people could not look away from. Stories from that period say Jim would sometimes stay in character between takes, using the same voice and unnerving expression, unsettling people around him. Jamie Foxx later spoke about how intense Carrey's presence could feel. That showed that his performances were not casual. He was going all the way inside these characters. What makes that period even more striking is that while his career was finally rising, his personal life was getting messier. During that same stretch, he was dealing with serious pressure off camera, including problems in his first marriage, financial stress, and his father's declining health. America watched this fearless comic while behind the scenes, his real life was far less stable. And then came the idea that would blow the doors off everything. Jim had been storing character ideas in notebooks for years, and one of them was Ace Ventura. Studios passed on it because the idea felt too weird, too risky. But Jim kept pushing. When Ace Ventura: Pet Detective opened on February 4, 1994, it was not expected to become a giant event. The film cost around $15 million to make, yet it pulled in over $100 million worldwide. Critics were mixed, but audiences loved it. And just like that, the strange character so many people doubted became the beginning of a takeover. But 1994 was not just a breakout year. It was a full explosion. Less than 6 months later, The Mask arrived on July 29, 1994. This was another perfect match between Jim's style and the material. The film became his biggest hit of the year, earning around $350 million worldwide and introducing Cameron Diaz in her first screen role. Then, before their event ended, came Dumb and Dumber on December 16, 1994. The film made about $250 million worldwide. Behind the scenes, another detail showed how fast Jim's power had grown by Dumb and Dumber. He was reportedly earning $7 million. The distance between that fake $10 million check in his wallet and reality was shrinking fast. But this era feels heavier than people remember. While audiences were enjoying the comedy, Jim was carrying something serious in private. He later said he had been on Prozac for a long time, describing his emotional life as a cycle of peaks and valleys with low periods lasting longer than people realized. Some of his biggest, funniest performances were happening while he was quietly dealing with deep, long-running depression. That contrast is what makes the whole period hit so hard. That darker shift became even clearer once The Truman Show arrived in 1998. Jim had to push for the role, personally fighting to get in front of director Peter Weir. Later, Weir said Carrey's audition was the finest he had ever seen. When the film came out, Jim won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Drama. But the Academy did not give him an Oscar nomination. When he accepted the Golden Globe, he got emotional. joking that he did not believe in awards, but the moment clearly meant everything to him. He was no longer satisfied being seen as just a comedy machine. Then came Man on the Moon in 1999, where things got even more intense. Jim stayed in character as Andy Kaufman constantly during the 5-month shoot, also slipping into Kaufman's loud alter ego, Tony Clifton. Danny DeVito later described the whole thing as disturbing. It was not just dedication. It felt like a man risking his own balance to disappear into someone else. How the Grinch Stole Christmas in 2000 turned into a different ordeal. The first day's makeup took 8.5 hours. Jim said it felt like being buried alive. The studio reportedly brought in a CIA expert who had trained agents to resist torture just to teach Jim mental tricks for surviving the costume process. By 2004, that emotional heaviness carried into eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. Michel Gondry reportedly saw Jim after a breakup and wanted him to stay emotionally broken because that sadness matched the role. Jim later said the character felt personal because he himself felt erased and hollow. Many critics still see it as his greatest dramatic performance because the pain on screen feels frighteningly real. In September of that year, Jim stepped onto a red carpet and gave one of the strangest celebrity interviews ever. He said there was no meaning to any of it, then went further and said he did not believe he existed. He spoke about people as ideas and said personality was built out of labels. The clip spread everywhere. By then, Jim had already started drifting away from the normal Hollywood machine, painting obsessively using dark imagery. He sounded like someone trying to tear down the whole idea of celebrity identity. Then came another surprise. After Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in 2022, Jim said he was serious about retiring. He explained that if he ever came back, it would need to be for something special enough to truly matter. After roughly 35 years of playing characters, the process had become spiritually exhausting. Then, after nearly 3 years without a major interview, he returned in a way nobody expected. In November 2025, Jim appeared publicly to induct Soundgarden into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Los Angeles. People noticed how calm and grounded he seemed. He did not look like the old hyperactive version the world had built in their heads. And then, just when people thought his private life had become impossible to read, another twist appeared. Jim Carrey and Jeanette Min-A were first linked in February 2022 when they were photographed, leaving a charity comedy event hosted by Judd Apatow in Los Angeles. The odd part is that the images barely caused any noise at the time. Later reports described her as an artist and actress based in Los Angeles. For around 4 years, Jim managed to keep Min almost entirely outside the celebrity spotlight. In a time when most famous people share every detail online, that silence felt almost impossible. That reveal came in Paris on February 26, 2026, when Jim received an honorary César at the 51st César Awards. The night was already unusual because he delivered part of his speech in French. Then he dropped the line that changed everything. He said, "I love you, Min." It was direct, personal, and impossible to miss. Reports say the room went quiet before reacting strongly. This was not a vague thank you. It was a clear public confirmation of a relationship that had been hidden for years. And Min was not just sitting somewhere in the crowd. She was seated with Jim's daughter, Jane, and his grandson. That seating arrangement revealed more than a speech could. It suggested this was not a new romance, but a relationship already accepted in private, long before the public heard about it. Now, after years of silence, Min is speaking. She describes a man completely different from the hyperactive clown the world thought they knew. She says that behind closed doors, Jim Carrey is quiet, introspective, and spends hours painting in his studio. She confirms that the retirement was real, not a publicity stunt, and that he only agreed to the César appearance because France has always embraced him as an artist, not just a comedian. She also addresses the depression publicly for the first time, revealing that the lost years were not a breakdown but a slow, necessary unraveling. He had to stop performing for the world before he could figure out who he actually was. Min also clarifies the marriage question. Jim has said before that he does not think marriage is necessary, and Min confirms they have no plans for a wedding. "We don't need a paper to prove what we know," she says. "What they have is privacy, trust, and a shared love of art and silence. At 62, Jim Carrey is not the man who once told the world he did not exist. He is a man who disappeared, rebuilt himself in private, and returned on his own terms with someone who saw it all, and is finally ready to tell the truth.